Good morning. God bless what is great, good, and real. I hope when this makes it to you that you are feeling blessed in all aspects of your life. I wanted to come on today, middle of the week, to ask you a very simple question. Maybe not so simple, because I like to think anyway that nothing is that simple. That could also just be my ego feeling itself, right? But what are you associating with this week? If we talk about reflection and introspection and setting goals and looking to optimize ourselves and our lives, well then, what exactly are you associating with for your week? And for me, this started because in my readings, I'm into William James right now, which I think he's masterful and it's complex. Sometimes I find myself needing a break to think about the things that I'm reading and how it applies. But disassociation, I think it's very cliche and niche to talk about how to disassociate and the power of disassociation. And certainly if you've been through some trauma, been through some difficulties, and are having a complex go with things spiritually, psychologically, in real life, then the tendency to consider disassociating with that is palpable for all the reasons it would be. No one wants to associate and assimilate and consciously continue to perpetuate any sort of difficulty in their lives. So they tell you to disassociate, but what does that mean? Thinking about what I've been reading recently, there's a logic to once I disassociate, then clearly I'm associating with something. I can't disassociate from everything. Now, I want to be very short in the danger of disassociation when it comes to the psyche level. When we start this process of disassociation, certainly we want to associate with the grander version of ourselves and do that. Do that to the extreme that you can and work on it as hard as you can for as long as you can and as diligently as possible to everything you have as far as faculties for you and yourself. But there's a danger in disassociation where you begin to tell yourself that who you were is not worth being, and you might feel like that's logical. But when you do that to yourself, what you're effectively saying is, this new me is everything, and the older you, the previous you that you want to disassociate with, you might forget that it once protected you. You might forget that it once carried you. You might forget that you wouldn't know to associate with something new if you couldn't disassociate with what was previously there, but you need that previous you if for no other reason than to keep you grounded in the manifestation of the new you, the building of the new you, and the associating with the new life you see for yourself, as large or as small or as large, or in any area for that matter, psychologically, spiritually, and all those other good things. So certainly by disassociating, we associate. What have you been associating with this week? How much time have you actually spent with yourself this week? And what have you spent time doing with yourself? Have you been on your phone a lot lately? And this is not for judgment. This is just to simply measure. Have you been exposing yourself to news? What kind of news? What kind of relationships? What kind of conversations? What kind of skills? What kind of physical work? What have you been associating with across your week as we are now in Wednesday? Because oftentimes I find by the middle of the week, that drift, we're talking about drift in our series that has been dropping this whole week. When we talk about attention, it's natural to drift because that's just a subconscious behavior. When you drift, you run the risk, of course, of stopping to associate with the higher you've been trying to bring to yourself. So I use my humble sort of life as an example. Where am I associating? I am continuing to give attention to my tight little circle. I'm having continued growth conversations with my wife, which I think is important. The person you're growing most closely with, you should be most aligned with and associated with, even if the two of you have very different views on how things should go. And I like to say proudly that my wife and I, we create a union, but we're separate. She brings herself, I bring myself, and we look to do things together. But certainly in our mid-40s, we're talking about, what does the next 5 years look like? And we're continuing those conversations. We're stacking those conversations. Where is she at and what is she associating with in her professional space that's going to lift her and not keep her stagnant, not keep her drifting? What is she paying attention to? That's significant for me because when I want certain things out of the relationship, a certain level of intimacy, a certain level of attention myself, I have to make sure that I'm tending to the things I need to tend to and associating with in our relationship that keep it harmonized and unified. Certainly there's conflict. Certainly things don't always go according to schedule. But even that within itself is powerful. But our dialogue is very centered around where we currently at in our growth relative to how we contribute to society so we can be compensated. We talked about compensation and why that's significant. How are we compensating each other? We have that conversation, I think, more and more as our relationship evolves, not to drift too much. We're pushing 30 years together, and there's such a big difference between 1 and 30 that's probably obvious and not worth getting into too deep detail. But you run the risk, right? If you're not associating with the relationship regularly and consciously, then it can sort of become very, very flat, if you would. So we're talking about her growth. I'm very focused on her growth. I know where I'm at in my growth. I feel the need less to discuss where we're at and where I'm at relative to where I need to be, because she knows, and I know that she knows, that I'm associating regularly on time all the time, right? She knows I'm up. She knows right now I'm down here going live. She knows I'm pushing and pursuing. The next two closest relationships, I'll get quickly to my son. He's sick. A very different experience. So I'm associating with the caring and the tending to him as he has the flu right now. And it's not great. We've all been sick, but I'm focusing diligently on being present, making sure he sees and feels me to help go through the illness. I prayed over him last night, and I prayed out loud, and I prayed over him the last couple of nights for his health and his return to harmonious states of being, and that he be strong through it, and that God, of course, support him. My daughter is 16. She's starting to have different relationships. She's starting to talk to people who, are influencing her life regularly. She's associating with higher levels of emotion while going through the high school experience. Those conversations have to remain stout. I have to be present. I have to associate with her in a way that shows protector, provider, and that whatever she needs, any sort of assistance with or understanding with, or just a voice to lean on, that I don't position myself too strongly to where she drifts away from me. That's important. I don't want to lose the connection in that relationship, so I work on it and I associate with it as strongly as possible. Professionally, it's a fun time. I talked recently about evaluations. Now I'm at the point where I hand out money, right? I have access to the budget. I shouldn't say I dictate, but I have access to parameters that help allocate bonus structures and cost of living increases. I have the opportunity to raise some and lower others. All of that is part of the beautiful part of management and helping people, and associating with that, the exposure it gives you. It's also a difficulty. You really want to make sure someone is identified who is a high achiever, and everybody, though, they did perform, so you want to make sure that they're accounted for and that they feel like they're being noticed respectively for the year that they had. And money's big. Everybody wants their money. And so, I'm focusing there professionally on making sure that that's good. Then with the channel, making sure that I'm responding to comments. They've been coming in more sort of consistently. We've been having a better impact across the spectrum of what we do here. What do I continue to associate with? What am I continuing to do to learn, to apply to the channel? Am I doing anything that is changing how I present the content? I just ordered a new desk and a new chair, trying to upgrade my exposure and my association with what I see, because it enhances how I feel about doing these things, right? The more you invest in what you're looking for and what you're trying to grow, the more the return on investment grows. It's simple math. ROI is big, right? What I associate with, I have to understand what the return on that association with is, and then I have to also be conscious of what I am no longer associating with. And some of it certainly is powerful and beneficial to the experience of self, and some of it leaves delta and leaves holes and leaves you sort of yearning, whether it's because it's relevant and pertinent to your growth, or because, again, you've disassociated with the previous self, and so you long for those things that you used to sort of have. So I'm always conscious of what I'm disassociating with on varying levels. I know I disassociated with alcohol and gaming and friends and going out. It's been almost 5+ years now at this juncture. But there are times and instances where I disassociate so much, that kind of ghost mode, that I might long for a conversation that's outside of my circle, just a bullshit kind of conversation. I don't have as many of those these days, but I also remember where I'm associating with. It doesn't leave me much time. In any event, the disassociation becomes palpable and critical. I identify what I'm disassociating with that is also not beneficial relative to how am I maximizing my time. I'm making sure I don't get drift and tangled in things that would sort of diminish my experience of self, or that would limit my experience of self. And I use that accordingly to measure and act upon. It also helps with adjustments. If I'm associating here, which means I'm disassociating here, if I want new associations and new disassociations, I go through that plus and minus sort of phase, because every time I add something, I'm pretty much maxed out with my bandwidth. Something got to go. So if I'm not optimizing, if I'm not taking something and just expanding it, where I already have the mechanism for time built in, then I may have to remove something. What can be removed? What do I need to disassociate with? I may not know in this moment, but if I think long enough about what I have to associate with, I can make those moves strategically and tactically. Significant for ourselves, significant for our psyches, significant for our spirit and our relationship with God or source or root, the infinite, whatever it is you want to align with, or not. You can choose to disassociate spiritually at your leisure. It's really your life. It's for what you want to do with it. But I didn't want to come on today. I thought I'd make that commitment. I think I said every other day, but it's more like Saturday, Wednesday, Monday thing, Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, at least 3 times a week. I'm going to continue to try to come on. In the middle of the week, I think is critical to not drift, to lock in on what I've already done for this week, what's coming up for the remainder of the week, what I'm associating with, the kinds of conversations I'm having, how it's helping me feel spiritually. But if I think about the do you cycle, and we transition into that phase of this as far as association and what you're paying attention to middle of the week, disrupt where you're at currently relative to where you may have not or may have made progress. All progress at this juncture is compounding, and it'll have its residual impact when it does. We don't know when, but it's you stack the little wins and allow them to compound the way that if you've stacked a couple of losses, those 2 are gone. Disrupt the reality of where you're at and know that what you have is today, and you want to then own it. Own today. Own what you are associating with, which also should highlight what you are disassociating with. And quite critically, what you associate and own consciously, regularly, you disassociate consciously along the way, whether you choose to or not. Then you want to yield. Yield the noise. Yield the relaxation of the hump day Wednesday to rush you towards a weekend where you could associate with a lot of nothingness that would not compound wins across the time you have, the temporal process of your life for continuing the greatness of yourself that you are. So yield the cliche around just getting through the rest of the week. Push yourself through the rest of the week. Then you want to observe. Observe certainly where you are right now. What have you done that you are associated with that has been positive, disassociated with that has been positive, associated with that hasn't been so great, disassociated with that hasn't been so great. Observe your state of consciousness and where you're at emotionally and how that's impacting you as you push towards the rest of the week. Then you want to unleash. As always, move anyway. Whether you've had more success or less, whether you are closer or further, unleash. The only way forward is to move forward, and continuing to, of course, be conscious along the way. So as always, change your mind, change your life. I am who I say I am, and stay rich.